about revision, the art of revision. So, go ahead and start playing this. So first things first, whether you're revising on your own or in the Writing Center, the first thing you need to do is check in with the assignment guidelines. And this really came to my attention when I was observing some sessions in the Writing Center the other day. Writing consultants should generally ask you for your assignment guidelines, but if they don't, I would like for you guys to be ready to pull them out and start the session by talking about them and going over them with your writing consultant. If you're working on your own, it's equally important to check in on that. Sometimes in the process of writing, we stray from the task at hand without even knowing it. So make sure you look over the guidelines again and share them with your writing consultants. I suggest printing them out. That way you can actively read them with highlighters and underline them and annotate them, pull out key words that talk really specifically about what you are meant to do. All right, so I talk about on the first slide global and local revision. So what is global revision? Global revision is also called larger order revision, first order revision. Basically, it should be the first stage of the revision process, and it is the revision of things like your thesis, your structure, organization, transitions, and paragraph formation. So, what are some strategies for global revision? Well, one of the best strategies that I have found is the reverse outline. And that is just like a regular outline, but you do it after you've written your paper. So here's how it works. You number each paragraph sequentially, and on a separate piece of paper, you write out the corresponding sequential numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and however many paragraphs you have, and then a separate piece of paper with those same numbers written on it. Then you're going to go through the paper and reread each paragraph on its own. And if you feel like you are too close to the paper, like you just wrote it, whatever you're reading, you might just be projecting what you thought you wrote onto your reading of it. You may want to decontextualize the paragraphs a little bit, and you can do this by going from back to front. So start with the last paragraph and work to the front. And for each number and each corresponding paragraph, you're going to try to summarize in a line what you actually accomplished in that paragraph. Not what you meant to accomplish, not what you remember accomplishing, but what you actually managed to do. So it looks a little something like this. This is just the first couple of pages of a paper. I've numbered the paragraphs, and then I've started to write a summary of what I did in that paragraph. All right. So how does the reverse outline work? Well, it calls attention to the broad strokes of what you accomplished. So you can see the overall shape of the paper. You can see also if things are underdeveloped, if they're overdeveloped, if there's anything that's missing, or if there's anything out of place. So for example, if you're struggling to just kind of focus on one thing in a paragraph that you can summarize in a line, you may have been trying to accomplish way too much in that paragraph. If your summary seems overly simplistic, maybe you didn't really develop out enough what you should have in that paragraph. For number one, that's usually going to be your introductory paragraph, and that's where we'll see your thesis at the end of that paragraph. And if you're really struggling to put words to this, then you might not have a thesis, and that is something that we want the reverse outline to show us if that's the case. I like to use this sort of these symbolic letters just to represent some things you might see once you get this summary in front of you. So if X represents an instance, in paragraph 2 and paragraph 4, if we see basically the same thing, it's notated here as X. And then That shows us that in paragraph 4, we've basically just repeated ourselves. Now, when does that happen? Well, sometimes if we don't have enough to talk about, if we haven't sort of dug deep enough into our analysis or into our research, then you might find that you are repeating the same thing over and over again, especially if you're trying to get to a paper minimum. We see in paragraph 3 there's y, but in paragraph 5 there's y plus 1. What does that mean? Well, y plus 1 is basically the same kind of material as paragraph 3, but it's been added to, it's been elaborated on. Now, that's a good thing, but why do we have them placed apart from each other in the paper? If we want to create a good flow, a good sense of natural transition, and a good sense of organization, we want to make sure that those are next to each other. So we'd either move that up or move it down, but we would want y and y plus 1 next to each other. Now, when we get to z, that's an issue because if we're generally writing a paper where we have x and then x plus 1 and y plus 1, and then there's just one little lone z paragraph, it might be telling us that we're not spending enough time elaborating on that idea. Perhaps, you don't want to necessarily have an imbalance of time and energy spent on some ideas and not on others. So you're going for that balance there as you develop your paper. And then A represents something that's kind of outside of whatever it is that we've been accomplishing with the others. So it means like maybe there's a point there that just doesn't fit with your paper. Maybe it's a good point, but it's just not fitting very well. All right, another way that you can accomplish global revision is by cutting it up, either by paragraph or by sentence. You can physically cut up your paper, and that gives you a chance to move elements around in ways that kinesthetically stimulates your brain. So you're using your body and not just sort of sitting there staring blankly at a computer screen. So stand up at a table or kneel on the floor and move the pieces around. That prompts you to use your major muscle groups, which helps you focus. It also helps you re-envision your work and experiment with different organizational schemes. All right, so if that's global revision and some strategies for dealing with those issues, what is local revision? Well, local revision should be done last. Local or lower order or last order concerns deal with grammar, syntax, typos, formatting, and word choice. Why do you do it second? Why do you do it last? Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to rewrite your sentences for better grammar and syntax only to then realize that you need to take out that entire paragraph that you just corrected. So really, it's a time efficiency thing. You don't want to waste time doing something that's going to be for naught. Some strategies for catching errors, local revision errors. Read your paper out loud. Better yet, have someone else read it out loud while you mark any places where you hear them stumble. If they're stumbling when they're reading your work, there might be something that is amiss in that sentence. Much like my advice before, you can read it from back to front, sentence by sentence. That decontextualizes each sentence so that you don't read what you thought you wrote, but read what you actually wrote. All right, what about these awkward sentences? When your professor writes awkward all over your paper and you're like, what? Calling sentences awkward is usually another way of saying there's something problematic with the syntax, word form, and or word choice. So for example, here's a sentence. These stories usually hold a lesson, teaching, or sometimes an explanation for a mysterious phenomenon in nature. The first question that I ask when I read this sentence is, what is it that this person wanted to say? The next thing that I can do to fix this awkward sentence is to pick out the important words. Make sure that there are no redundant words. And in a list, like the one here, or maybe this is a list, I'm not sure, make sure there's a parallel structure so that the items match grammatically. So if you have a list of nouns, they should all be nouns. If you have a list of verbs, they should all be verbs. If you have a list of gerunds, they should all be gerunds. You want to make sure that any list you write is grammatically consistent throughout. Also, make sure that you're not being overly vague. What are these stories? Um, are you choosing the best words for what you want to express? So, here's some words that I'm kind of latching onto when I look at this. The red things are giving me pause. The green phrase I think is actually quite good, so I'm going to hold on to that. So I'm going to play around with this to see what works to make it sound stronger. Some questions I might ask as I play with that are, which stories? Have I been clear about that leading up to this sentence? Do I need to kind of restate or be specific about that? What does hold a lesson mean? Sometimes we use phrases in academic papers that we would never, ever use. That, it's not even something that really makes sense. Is that a phrase we use? Can we try something else like convey a lesson? Also, isn't the word teaching there redundant of the hold a lesson part? Can we condense that and make it one thing? So maybe we rephrase this as something like, fairy tales like those seen in Charles Perrault's Contes de Fées usually convey a lesson or provide an explanation for a mysterious phenomenon in nature. Much more clear. We're specific where we need to be. We're consistent throughout, and it makes a lot more sense. So my ultimate advice here with the awkward sentences is to play with the wording, word choice, and word order to discover the best articulation of your sentence. Take the time to identify what it is that you're trying to say. Highlight what's working, highlight what's not working, and mess around with the possibilities until you get to the best articulation of that sentence. And that is all that I have for you today about revising your work. More to come. Thank you.